Hey, David Brewster here with the Three for All, and this is three Jimmy Herring licks from 2011. And I've been a Jimmy Herring fan since like the early to mid 90s. And when I was a student at AIM in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where Jimmy used to teach, there were all these students and some of the teachers, that were talking about Jimmy Herring, and I was like, who is that? And even my roommate that I had when I first started school, he let me borrow. It was Colonel Bruce Hampton and the Aquarium Rescue Unit's Mirrors of Embarrassment. And when I heard that album, I was just blown away. Here was this kind of like swampy, avant-garde, kind of like rock, blues, jazz, fusion-y kind of thing. But, it was just really different, very southern, very, kind of one foot in the Allman Brothers and another foot in, like Miles Davis or like Coltrane or something. It was like, what in the world is this, crazy music? But I loved it, and, I just heard some of his music. There was a lot of curriculum and some videos and some things that he had made, as a teacher at AIM. And as soon as I heard that album and started looking at some of the material, I was like, wow, this guy is amazing, and that was a long time ago. And of course, since that time, he continued to play with the Aquarium Rescue Unit. He was a member of Jazz is Dead, which is a phenomenal kind of Grateful Dead tribute, Rod Morgenstein, T. Lavitz, Alfonso Johnson. Billy Cobham was actually involved on the first album. Jazz is Dead is amazing. I'm not really a Dead fan, but when I heard that music, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the Grateful Dead, played by these, top shelf, musicians, and it just blew me away. Frog Wings, he played with the Dead for a while. He's played with a bunch of groups. He's appeared with, Derek Trucks on a few albums, and they've kind of, shared the stage and recorded together. So he's been around for a while. Of course, Widespread Panic. He toured with John McLaughlin. There's a bunch of stuff that he's done. So he's a phenomenal player. I'm a huge, huge fan, and I'm such a big fan. I even wrote a Lesson for Guitar Player magazine as a tribute to him, which was the October 2017 issue. And that's how big of a fan of Jimmy Herring I am. I, focused on, kind of featuring him in a lesson for guitar player. Jimmy Herring's one of the like few guitarists out there that when I hear him play, it just makes me smile. The only other guitarist I can honestly think of that does that's Jeff Beck. Those two players, for some reason, when I hear them really kind of soar and take off, playing music, it just puts a smile on my face. It's just one of those players that's kind of rare. He's very melodic, he's very technical, a heavy, heavy jazz influence, but there's also this rock and blues kind of backbone with everything he does. And as soon as I heard him, I was like, oh my gosh, that's, I want to emulate, some of those ideas because it was a whole new ball game, as soon as I found him and started kind of picking through some of his music. It was like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. I've never played anything like this before, and I just dove into it. The licks I selected for this lesson came from a bootleg, once again, I found on YouTube, and it's from 2011. And it's a pretty chaotic, situation. Like when you watch the clips and you kind of take in, what he was playing, it sounds like they're just completely jamming, like an outro, or maybe like a solo section in a song. The whole band is just rocking out, and then of course, Jimmy just steps up to the plate and knocks a freaking home run, using his guitar. Where it's like, gosh, exceptional, So whenever you're looking at a player like this, it's almost like looking at someone like Alan Halsworth or, Schofield or somebody like that, where it's like, it's not just a casual thing where you're just going to sit down and start playing it. It's like, no, it's very intense. There's a lot of thought that kind of goes into, Jimmy's music, and he's a very knowledgeable guitarist. So he'll mix, blues licks and rock licks with like jazz and fusion ideas. He's got all these crazy, chromatic ideas and really interesting things in his music. So if you're not really, familiar with his music or his guitar playing, prepare yourself because this is really, really cool stuff. But it's different, which is good. I've selected some licks here, and I'm actually showing them out of sequence. Like as far as, when you sit down and watch this clip on YouTube, they're not in the order that I'm going to show them in, but I'm kind of building towards something with this. So there's a reason why, I kind of put them together this way. So the first lick, the solo itself is loosely based around like G, G7. And like I said, the band is just kind of rocking out. Like you can hear the bass and the drums are just going nuts. And then you hear Jimmy, start to go nuts on the guitar. And so it's loosely based around G, kind of maybe like a G9, kind of tonality, G7. There's some rocking out going on with this, or jazzing out, I guess you could think. But the first idea is kind of a bending idea, and Jimmy definitely has a very unique and expressive bending technique. And he grabs, bent notes with a lot of authority and conviction. He really digs in, he'll pick hard, but he'll do these very expressive things with bending. In this lick, we're in the key of G loosely, and you can hear he's basically targeting a D note here on the B string on the 15th fret, and he starts the bend on A here on the high E string on the 17th fret. So he grabs the D, grabs that A note, and then bends it up a whole step. So in the grand scheme of things in G, he's basically bending that ninth up to the major third. Something like that. So it looks and sounds like this. And he really digs in there. And then he grabs that D, and then he ends up grabbing the B note way up on the 19th fret, and he starts bending that up a half step. And then he grabs the 20th fret, which is C, and then he bends that up a whole step to grab D. Now, I really like that lick because it's unusual, and he's moving, the bent note higher, and then he's kind of retaining that D note there on the B string, and he's almost using it like a pedal in a way, where he keeps going back to that D. All right, the next lick's this kind of blurry, almost kind of Dickie Betts, like Allman Brothers kind of lick. And he's basically starting in the box right here. And he's going to grab the 18th fret there on the B, bend that up a whole step with some vibrato. And then he starts doing this pull-off run. And then he flips the pull-off run into a hammer-on run. And then he starts adding some additional notes. He stretches up. And then he basically just starts climbing up to that C note so he can target and bend that D. And I really like the way he kind of like changes it as it uncovers the phrase, because he's starting this, and he starts with this pull-off run. And then he flips that around to a hammer-on phrase. Then he starts grabbing that A note there. Then he grabs C way up on the 20th fret there. And then he grabs B. And then he starts walking that scale out. It's a really cool lick. Really cool lick. Right, the next lick's this kind of phrase melodic run, and he starts kind of turning the beat around in the middle of the phrase. So he starts doing this. Really cool lick. It looks and sounds like this. And it's kind of a familiar phrase. I think that's actually like a jazz lick. He probably lifted from someone. But I like the way it's kind of playing with the time. He's also kind of playing with your ear because he's just rephrasing the same, melodic motif. But, when you do that and you start kind of bouncing around the rhythm, it catches your attention. Really cool phrase. I like that. Okay, here's a bonus lick from the solo, and this contains a really common thing you'll hear Jimmy Herring do a lot, and these kind of legato, stretched pentatonic runs, really. And he's kind of doing, it's almost like a pivot arpeggio, but he's kind of doing it out of the minor pentatonic scale. So once again, this is in the key of G, but this phrase kind of comes out of the E minor pentatonic box, which would also be the G major pentatonic box. And he basically starts, with a whole step bend here on 15. And then you'll hear this kind of stretch, pivot lick. So here's what it looks and sounds like. And I really like phrases like that. It kind of reminds me of things you'll hear from, rock guitarists, Jakey Lee or Nuno Bettencourt or Gary Moore or someone like that. But Jimmy's been playing those kind of licks for a long time. You'll definitely hear a lot of guitarists, play licks and phrases like that. So slowly. And he does those licks frequently. So if you're familiar with this music, or if you're, gonna check out some more of his, his music and his soloing, you'll catch him doing that quite a bit. These kind of extended legato, slippery runs, and I love that. That's going to wrap this look at some licks from Jimmy Herring, and definitely, very exciting and interesting guitarist, and he has a huge, discography. So if you're new to his playing and his music, he has a lot of music that you can check out. And I highly recommend his solo album, Lifeboat. Lifeboat's amazing. Anything with Colonel Bruce Hampton, the Aquarium Rescue Unit, any of the Jazz is Dead albums are amazing. He's got a lot of work, with Widespread Panic and some of the other groups he's worked with too. But check out Jimmy Herring. Maybe look him up online and kind of do a little research, and then start listening and start finding, some of his music. An exceptional player, very different. Not a normal, kind of rock guy, but he has a lot of rock, techniques. Usually has some kind of, overdriven tone and stuff like that when he plays. So even for, like rock players out there, you can kind of latch onto them and learn a little bit more about jazz and fusion at the same time. So leave some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it. Thank you.